Hello, everyone. We are live today. It is Friday, which is not the usual day we go live. This is a little different from our normal programming that we do on Saturdays with the Deep Learning textbook study group. We're actually doing a special webinar for you today through Excel AI, specifically for our AI Genomics Hackathon that's taking place this weekend. It's a really huge event. We've been planning for quite some time now, which we're super excited about. And we have a lot of great partners and sponsors for this event. So to give you a little background information, this is a AI Genomics Hackathon. It's the first hackathon that we are actually participating in as an organizer and sponsor. And specifically, it's focusing on the NF2 tumor sequences. And so what we're doing is we're partnering with the Silicon Valley artificial intelligence nonprofit group, the NF2 project. And we're hosting this event at Google Launchpad. We're very fortunate to have them with us as sponsors for this event. And then also we have Google Cloud that's sponsoring the event as well. They've donated about 150,000 in computing credits for the event specifically. And then we also have Google Genomics, and then NVIDIA is a really huge sponsor, and that's going to be more the focus of our webinar today specifically, is their prizes that they sponsored, which are the NVIDIA GeForce Titan Pascals, which are really awesome, and we'll be talking more about those in just a minute. But we wanted to give you some more information about the event itself. This is a really special opportunity that we have to work with patient data from an ongoing medical case provided by Ono Faber. He's a serial entrepreneur and an NF2 patient. So this is really kicking off the first open source medical AI community project of its kind here with these partners. And like I said, it's just super exciting here in San Francisco. And the purpose of this event really is to contribute to real ongoing patient case of NF2. So we're trying to advance the understanding of NF2 mutations. We want to encourage more AI researchers to pursue healthcare, biology, and problems such as this. And we want to explore, really this unique data set, which most people have not had the opportunity to work with. And of course, we're establishing an open source community for the future of medical AI collaborative hacking with this event in collaboration with our partners. And so for this event specifically, when people participate, they'll be given the opportunity to do a presentation at the end of the weekend, and they'll be after they submit their presentation, they'll be judged by the following criteria. Each presentation will be judged based on how well the solution actually leads to positive outcomes for NF2 cancer patient treatment, how novel the approach is to finding a solution, quality and depth of the problem analysis ahead of time, and then also, of course, team dynamics, diversity and intersectionality, including cross-discipline and specialization collaboration. So we want to make sure everyone is working together really well and that they're super happy. And of course, they bring a lot of diversity to their team, across different types of industries and research fields as well. So I want to go ahead and introduce our presenter for this webinar specifically. We have Carlos Uranga. And he'll be talking about, of course, the NVIDIA Titans. Do you want to say hi, Carlos?
Hello, everybody.
And do you want to give a little background information on yourself as well?
Sure will. Yes. So my name is Carlos Uranga, and I was formerly the director of innovation lab at Singularity University, where I was served as a mentor and a developer. To get hands-on with what we call exponential technology. And as you know, a lot of what we're talking about is influenced by this exponential technology, usually silicon-based, and it's spawning all kinds of neat things, and we're trying to make sense of it there at Singularity and teach people anywhere from Fortune 100 to startups as well. So I'll be talking about GPUs in specific right now, and kind of the inflection scene around circa 2010. So I hope you enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Carlos. Would you mind sharing your screen for us?
All right, there we go. Are we live there?
Yep, perfect. Just hit present and you'll be all set.
Fantastic.
Great.
Okay, so wanted to just give a brief overview since NVIDIA, like Laura said, NVIDIA is a sponsor and we're very grateful. one of the main drivers of deep learning technology is the GPU. And the GPU is just a fantastic piece of equipment that scales very well for crunching huge data sets in a multi-processing form. So as you can tell, that there was an interesting thing that happened where neural nets were well known for over 50 years, but all of a sudden things happened where we started seeing patterns and pattern recognition in data and being able to filter through big data and see some interesting things. So I just wanted to give a brief overview. I'm going to give a little background. I'm sure people have seen Moore's Law and how the CPU is tracking of the number of transistors and the power doubling. The interesting thing that happens here is that, and one of the things we talk about at Singularity University, which I always like to include because I think it's very relevant to see where this technology is going to be, you know, in the near future, and maybe also be able to guide research in general, and maybe spawn new innovations based on understanding where the trajectory of this technology is headed. And I use the CPU example first because now the GPU seems to be almost surpassing in many ways the power of this computational method or computational device. So the interesting fact that I want to point out in this particular slide is this is an exponential curve that is also spawning new technologies. It was basically a lot of pieces of technology have spawned off of this, and now reverting back and going back full circle to make this compounding exponential. Namely software. Let's say so hardware-enabled software. New CAD design software is now enabling new architectures in silicon. And with new architectures in silicon, we can crunch, basically do more floating point operations per second, so flops. And I'll describe that more in detail. But the interesting thing is that now we can say that the CAD software is coming back and then designing new hardware. Well, that's spawning a new breed of software, and that's what we're seeing here in AI in general and machine learning. Is this new breed of software is going to be able to refine again new hardware. So we're seeing the cyclical innovation pattern, which is really interesting to me, and I think to a lot of people and to all of us. That you know, when we're talking about machine learning algorithms, the applications are almost endless in the fact that we're generating tons of data. And in particular, I can just say like refining a CAD model for novel architectures, and I'll discuss that in a sec here. So here's what the comparison between the CPU and the GPU. And the CPU is kind of leveling off a little bit. You know, some people have said Moore's Law is over, but then, you know, parallel processors, etc., or multiprocessors have also bred a new life to the CPU. But CPUs are really just a general processing unit, and the GPU is really interesting because it was, you know, originally engineered very specifically to deal with screens and frame buffers and graphics, computer graphics. OpenGL and all these different graphics languages really needed something very specialized, a specialized piece of hardware. Where we're talking about, you know, the gaming community needed quicker triangles per second and better texture mapping. So what did that mean is that you had these huge data sets coming in frames, and you needed a parallel processor and very highly specialized. So then somewhere around 2009 or so, with the advent of the Kepler architecture, which I'll talk about as well a little bit more in detail, is we saw something very interesting where people revisited old neural network type concepts of basic input-output of these huge data sets that are crunched at the simultaneously, and then really not knowing too much of what's going on in between. Many times these data sets are nonlinear in nature, multivariable, multivariate, I think is the right way to say that. Really just interesting, where people just started seeing these interesting patterns. And so one of the neat things that happened, this is actually the Maxwell architecture, but you know, it's a good slide to be able to show that you have these huge input of data, and it comes in, it's basically highly parallelized data coming in and getting crunched. When I say crunched, basically you have a simple function that you compute around it and process it in parallel, and then you convolute it, right? As many people know, but maybe there's some people, you know, new to AI. Just wanted to hit the basic concept there. Although you're going to get a lot more during this hackathon, hopefully. So one of the main subunits, kind of almost at the hardware level, is this streaming multiprocessor. So they abbreviate it as SMM, and that's one of the basic subunits that manages the cores and synchronizes them in these memory buffer regions. And you'll know, and I'll talk about a little bit, is that memory management is very important in system architecture. Being able to handle these big data sets, they need to flow at a reasonable amount of time and be computed simultaneously. So the NVIDIA architecture just fit really well. And what happened, interestingly, is that when NVIDIA open sourced, kind of to a certain extent, the access to the hardware level manipulation, if you will, or the programming, and basically made these wrappers of C and C++ wrappers to give developers access to that power to be able to crunch numbers simultaneously. So then, so a little bit of just the history again is, and I found this is a very clear, concise statement. Modern graphics processors far surpass now the computational abilities of multi-core CPUs. So that's also kind of coinciding with this 2012 timeframe, where we saw really just it take off, where GPUs really started to show much more power in general to do floating point operations. So very simple math, but highly parallelized is the idea here. And then I'm going to show a little bit about the Titan X, and this is the one that actually we're giving away at the hackathon, and we're very grateful for NVIDIA for donating 3 of them for the top 3 projects. So the Titan X Pascal, so that's a new architecture. So it went from Kepler. This is where the actual departures happened at that time, and then you had these SMs that I was telling you. The simultaneous multiprocessor. You can see there's a number of 8 here, and then it jumped quickly to the 16 of those mega units, if you will, on the GPU. And you saw some really interesting things just from this jump. So here we saw that deep learning started to take hold, and then we saw at Maxwell that there was just a multitude of other applications, not just in image processing, let's say, but a lot of other things, just higher order data sets. Then there's all kinds of other variants where people can bring in just mainly the basic unit here, which is the CUDA core, and something that they talk about as one of the small units in this SM, or the simultaneous multiprocessor. So not to get too into it, but one thing I wanted to show here is this memory column here. That's quite important. And what happened is that in the new Pascal architecture, and we'll talk about that, that's the basic transistor unit, the memory management was improved tremendously, where now you can have a very not only parallelized GPU, or sorry, not only parallelized inside the GPU, you also had multiple GPUs that now can share essentially like a RAM memory. And that was really interesting in that you can now manage even larger data sets, and now really proves the scalability of this technology as a whole, and the GPU as the basic subunit of bigger and bigger data sets. So that scalability is hugely important when you're talking about just increasingly, exponentially increasing complexity in your data sets and the size.
That is so fascinating.
That is so fascinating, Carlos.
I'm glad you like it. so yeah, we're just doing kind of like the multiple levels that you can actually do some of this deep learning is not just happening in big mainframe data center type architectures, but also really small, and it scales down as well, is what I would like to note. And one of my main interests is actually AI at the edge. And what's interesting there is that we have also, because of the same phenomenon from Moore's laws, you're having these sensors that are also being made with the same process, which is basically photoelectrochemical etching of silicon, being able to make these little tiny sensors. Like in particular, one that interests me, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, is the thermal imager called the microbolometer, which is basically an array. I work with a sensor that has 16,000 points that can sense in the 9 to 14 micron range of infrared energy. And the interesting thing, it's not visible to humans, but it's extremely visible to science, I would like to say, in that basically you can determine the language of atoms based on their temperature and their composition. They'll radiate or reflect a certain wavelength in that spectra, and you can actually really get some amazing multi-dimensional information there. In particular in medical imagery, and eventually we can also talk about genomics and how that's all converging. So it's really important to just keep in mind the full breadth of applications and the expanse and the different architectures. In particular, these are some of the nomenclature for the NVIDIA product that is affecting. And actually, there's some new architecture as well, the Volta. But the interesting thing that's happening here is that they have basically a whole vertical integrated system. NVIDIA really has done an amazing job to embrace this, and open source and engage the developers to be able to do basically all the way to bare metal, from high order software all the way to bare metal type analysis and development, I should say. So here we're talking about the frameworks, which is basically the software interfaces to this GPU system, and then the server companies, etc., are embracing that as well. And as you know, we have access to the Google Cloud GPU systems, which is great, and we'll be able to work on that. But also, we have the low-level type technologies that we hope to bring in, and is being donated as a prize. So the question is that can you do this on your own? And of course you can. It's a little slower. You can do it on your, a lot of people that are listening probably have done it on their laptop and been maybe a little frustrated once their data sets get a little bit larger. But it's not that hard to actually develop a system. I wanted to just briefly talk about one more slide here about the really low-level innovation that's happening at the 16 to 14 nanometer scale with now the new Pascal architecture and the Volta architectures. So it's really enabling a whole new breed of applications. And I just wanted to note that self-driving cars, really the Pascal is really the one that drove the self-driving car innovation. It started as early as the Maxwell, but with the TK1 in the mobile platform, the Tegra set. But then autonomous machines, robots, and drones are going to be able to do computer vision at the edge again, which is basically small training sets to be able to identify objects, and it's a lot quicker. If it's actually doing deep learning, real-time deep learning at the edge, then you can actually make almost reflexive, reflexive movements, just like the human body does. So we have our CNS, right, our central nervous system, and we also have our peripheral nervous system. You can make those interesting analogies with that. And those are little teeny tiny deep learning, real-time deep learning neural nets that have been trained to be able to bring about these the robotic innovation. And then, so yeah, just moving on, I touched on the fact that, can you build this at home, and is it worth it to get a GPU? And I've noticed in my particular applications, when you go scaling downwards, it's absolutely essential. This is actually the prize that we're giving away. It was a Titan X. It's the Pascal architecture. And this thing is changing remarkably. There's already a new GPU even after this one. This one was released in August 2016, and now there's the 1080 Ti, which is more for gaming, and it's actually maybe a candidate to bring in even potentially as a replacement to the Titan X in many ways, but depending on your application. It's slightly more RAM memory on this one, so this one's a little bit more pro for deep learning applications. The 1080 is more geared towards gaming. But then you can see how the scalability works here inside a typical dev box, as they call it. This is the digits dev box from NVIDIA, and this gives you 42 teraflops, which is just amazing. It's 100% usable for really any application at some point. This is kind of a nice place to work for rapid prototyping and large data sets and imaging, and pretty much anything you want to do. And then eventually, then you can graduate to the higher order cloud-based and recruit more GPUs. And that's basically spun up, if you will, very scalably, and you can recruit as many GPUs as you want. But that does come at a cost, 49 cents per hour. So this is one of the numbers that I got. So when you're rapid prototyping and you're learning, it's probably best to be working in this arena a little bit, so it has its use case. So that's why I'm definitely keen on helping put that discussion forward to say, hey, this is quite useful there.
We do have a quick question from the chat room. Someone has asked, is this watercooled?
Yes, actually, great question. It's actually only water-cooled, this particular design. It's only water-cooled in the CPU, but it's actually a hexa-core. I believe it's a hexa-core Intel i7 6850, if you really want to know. But basically, what it means is that that one is managing the RAM memory. So it's 64 gigabytes of RAM memory that feeds into the GPU cluster. So yes, it does get quite hot. Anytime we're moving these transistors, these amazing amounts of in the billions, 12 billion transistors per GPU. You can imagine just a lot of heat is generated. So heat management is definitely an issue, and so water-cooled is the way to go for sure. There's also kits that you can buy for the GPUs themselves. They like to run at 65 degrees Celsius. Sometimes they ramp up and they get throttled back automatically. So sometimes you'll notice a performance gain when you do remove that heat. So the next step up, that's a great question, by the way. But the next step up is the DGX1. So this is more like for, let's say you have an MRI machine or a research facility. This is now going towards the core facility. Where you have multiple researchers that are now wanting to do localized training, and the neat thing here, and one point that I should have mentioned earlier maybe, is that local deep learning training is also very good for something like what we're going to do here at the hackathon. Is we're using maybe sensitive information or patient data, and we want to keep it in a closed loop, not to have it out in the wild. are getting released, maybe abiding by certain HIPAA or CLIA regulations, depending on what you're doing. This is a fantastic solution, and definitely a favorite with researchers. The next iteration. So before, this was a Pascal architecture. Now it upgraded to the Tesla P100. Just again, more RAM, more CUDA cores is basically what you can say, which is the basic subunit inside of the GPUs. So again, just as to keep in mind as you're stepping up in your prototyping. Okay, so here's a little bit of a trend that I wanted to point out, and so again, just the same thing we want to talk about as data gets a little bit more multivariate, that you really do need to start scaling up, or else you'll notice that your training is going to take quite a long time, and in some cases it's just not possible. You might run actually RAM limits in many ways. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the stuff gets super technical and all the way from the physics to and computationally in the computer engineering side of things. But again, just something to briefly touch on. Here's a little trend that I wanted to show too, is that from 2015 to 2016, you can see that this is just an amazing exponential curve there on the improvements. Then we're talking about now when you have certain CPU and GPU combos. I don't know if anybody heard the recent advancement by AMD. And AMD now came out with a kind of a server. It's called the EPYC CPU. And we're going to see that maybe even replace the Xeon. It's anybody's guess, but they say that they've had some really good results to be able to feed this GPU cluster in a much more efficient way. So just keep in mind that this can get swapped out with any other parallel CPU situation. And just there's an actual picture of the Tesla, but so that's basically the trends that I wanted to show. And just near and dear to my heart, I wanted to show you a little bit about what I'm working on. Is being able to identify or being able to revisit older technologies is now becoming really valuable. This is the OpenBCI headset, EEG headset. Basically, it's electroencephalogram. If you're not familiar, it's taking basically the conductivity of the skin there and translating basic brainwaves and determining the activity of the brain in certain regions, usually the topology of the cortex. But what's going on here is that now in conjunction with deep learning, you can also compute at the edge, maybe mind control robots. This is a brain control interface in a way. So what used to happen is that you'd get a lot of noise from a lot of different signals here, and you're now able to filter in real time, which is also very interesting. And this is this architecture is the TX1. Now they have the TX2, but in particular, I'm working still on the TX1. About to graduate to the TX2. Basically, this is 1 teraflop with less than 8 watts of energy, or let's just say hovering at 10 watts of energy, depending on your use case. And it's just absolutely amazing what you can do with this. So just keep that in mind that it can go all the way down and scale down as well, and you can do deep learning at this level. So hopefully getting the kind of the creative juices flowing when you're thinking about your innovations. Labeling data is important. The quality of the data is important, especially coupling genomic with other sensors and that data, and then certain phenotypes is I think is going to be a big boon for this for genomics in general and deep learning in genomics. So just looking at the basic pattern here of where you get signal acquisition, feature extraction, and you can see that there's 2 different technologies that you're seeing here. well, I mean, this is actually a heat map of the signal in the EEG, but you can also imagine, this is a particularly nice synopsis of how the data flow is actually changing, and you can start cutting off a lot of these steps in the process. So we can talk more about it later, and if you guys have any questions about what I'm doing there. But just to end, I wanted to show again, to get the creative juices flowing, hopefully, that you're talking about huge data sets and very rich data sets that can now be elucidated and patterns being identified. And this is thermal imaging, again, something that I'm familiar with, and you're seeing certain patterns. So for preventative medicine, it's just fantastic because deep learning can see things that we can't see, or the radiologists can't see, or you name it. So so just to end there, if you guys have any questions, I'd love to.
We do have a question from Neil Shaw in the chat. He asked, how can I run single deep learning code with multiple GPUs?
Okay, single deep learning code on multiple GPUs. Well, the tool set from NVIDIA, the CUDNN, that basically allows kind of automatic recruitment of the GPUs based on your use case. So I would just invite you to really dig deep on the tool chain from NVIDIA. So if you're talking specifically about hardware recruitment, that's basically NVIDIA's bread and butter, if you will, to be able to scale that in software and hardware and have those two things married. So we can talk more about that in detail, but basically that's a lot of this stuff is done automatically, which is pretty remarkable.
Definitely. And then we have another question. Is it possible to join the hackathon online? And yes, it is possible to join remotely. If you visit sv.ai/hackathon, there's a link in there to still join remotely as of today. And you can also join the Slack channel through that website. And then that'll allow you to participate and potentially join a team remotely online as well. So I'm posting that link in the Slack as well. But feel free to join us remotely and online. So that's the only other question from the chat at the moment. We do encourage people to continue asking questions. We have a little bit more time available here. So Carlos, I was wondering, what are really the benefits of working with hardware in person versus cloud computing, for example? Because we're fortunate to have cloud computing credits that were sponsored by Google Cloud for this event specifically, but what would be the benefit of doing cloud over hardware? In what case, which one would be more relevant?
Right, great question, and yeah, maybe I should have hit that a little bit harder. But the main concern here is that you don't want to be using resources because they're charging per GPU and per time. So that basically scales your costs as well as you're scaling your GPUs. So when you're learning, I would really recommend that maybe try to do as much as you can on the laptop. Hopefully, if you do have an NVIDIA GPU on your laptop, it's unfortunate that they usually on the Macintosh they went from the NVIDIA to the Raytheon, I think the AMD version. So a lot of the tool chains aren't available, which I think is really more powerful in the NVIDIA category. But if you can get a hold of any NVIDIA GPU on a personal computer is really the best way I would go for rapid prototyping of certain data sets. You can really do a lot. At least you'll know essentially your time to compute, and then you can scale that out to the cloud a little bit more intelligently without spending too many credits. Awesome.
And can you think of other applications that are unique to the medical industry or to medical research where this can be applied?
My co-founder in this endeavor, he actually started out with MRI, for instance. So he did a bunch of MRI slices of the brain, And what's interesting there is that his technique was pretty cool, where he had a bunch of slices of the brain and was able to actually voxelate the data. So he interpolated from one slice to the next slice to the next slice, and from those voxels, it's kind of like it's a little bit more information that was readily available for the deep learning process to be able to extract. How do you say the main purpose there was to identify tumors in the brain. And he was able to extract, he did a comparison of just doing the 2D data versus the 3D data. And I just found that pretty interesting. It comes to mind because it's very visually gratifying to be able to see not only the 2D slice or the outline of the tumor in the brain, but you also started seeing like actually the volume of the tumor. And with the volume of the tumor, now there's certain devices that I forget exactly the technology name, but it's radiation that's directed to ablate the tumor. So it's high energy radiation that comes in at the brain like this. But the point is that you're limited to the amount of radiation that you can induce in the brain, because you might kill the good tissue that's surrounding it. So what happens is that there's this special device, and the name is escaping me, the name of the inventor that made this amazing device. So now there's a directionality to the radiation that you can induce, and now get a more complete ablation of the tumor. So I found that one fantastic.
Yeah, definitely fascinating. We do have another question in the chat. Yogesh has asked, can you suggest a few steps to come up with applications specific to CNN architecture?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Can you suggest a few steps of how to come up with applications specific to CNN architecture, so convolutional neural network architecture?
Yeah, application specific.
So I know we were talking about computer vision yesterday, and applying CNNs for different graphics and gaming, correct?
Right. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's a general ask of why we're using convoluted neural networks to be able to determine patterns. The interesting thing, as you just mentioned, and from our conversation, is that there's a lot of convergence that's happening in computer vision and, let's say, genomics. And that's one of the slides that I was trying to find, but I couldn't find it at the right for the presentation. But what people are doing is they're forming the conteg of the genome, right? So the way sequencing works is that you have a bunch of stacked genes, and then eventually you in next generation sequencing you have the read length that's overlapping, and then you get a confirmation of let's say a base pair call. And the interesting thing is that you can actually just visualize that in colorimetrically based on a base pair, and just feed that in, kind of like in a dumb way. You can feed that in, if you can even say that in a dumb way, but really you're just feeding in this 2D matrix of colors, which are representative of the base pairs of the DNA, and you see actual patterns come out. And so it's a little hard to describe without a picture, but you can imagine just based on that, you start seeing these interesting patterns.
Definitely. And I know we were also talking yesterday about specifically the image that we used for the hackathon event page. And you were telling me about how that's a new way to look at genomic sequences. Can you describe that a little bit for our viewers as well?
Sure, not necessarily a new way, but that's actually a very common way to what that's also a conteg essentially, or a super conteg. I think they started putting that name to it. Basically, it's the number of read lengths as you pile them up gives you confirmation, and then I forget what the standard for clinical data is. It's in the 50x read range. It used to be 20, 30x. So what that means is you have to sequence the whole genome 20 times or 30 times, and basically you stack that up. And then if you have like an A, T, C, G, you have a certain level of confidence based on how big your contig is. So the higher your confidence, the better your data, the better your training is going to happen.
Definitely.
So, yeah, on the website.
Yes.
Choice.
And then there's another, to follow up on that last question that we had from Yogesh, he says, I understand CNNs are very useful for computer vision. However, more interesting would be to know how many layers, what CNN kernel to use specifically. So I guess that really depends on the application or problem you're trying to solve. Correct, Carlos?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm actually, you know, jumping on the bandwagon hopefully a little bit earlier than you know, a lot of people, but I'm still trying to actually determine how to choose that the number of layers that you want to go for. For me, it's absolutely I would say just until you start seeing a pattern and you start seeing a certain confidence in your data. And I can't stress enough that it's good to create your data if you can, and enriching it with certain facts or data, and then as you increase that sample size, then you might not need as many layers to actually get a pattern. So that's, I guess, the best way I can describe that.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds good. And then we have another question. Can RNN architecture be used to analyze genome sequences?
RNN or RNA?
They said specifically RNN, so recurrent neural network architecture.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking genomics. Sorry. So repeat the question again.
Yep. Can RNN architecture be used to analyze genome sequences?
I am actually not familiar with RNN, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I could help there, but I don't think I can.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I don't see why it wouldn't be able to. So RNNs are recurrent neural networks. Maybe we could have someone else from the chat also fill in if someone else that's viewing knows more about that area. But basically, an RNN is a class of artificial neural networks that connects between units of a directed cycle. So it's very similar to convolutional neural networks, but they're not stacked upon each other as much as CNNs are. So again, I think it would really just depend on your application, and then also what you want to do with it and how you're trying to solve the problem. And to your point, Carlos, that oftentimes with deep learning and artificial intelligence at this stage, a lot of it is experimentation, right? And just trying to test as much as possible and see what works, right?
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, great. Did you have any other last-minute points that you wanted to make? Because we're close on time right now.
Yeah, I think the main point is ask a lot of questions, and we're all going to learn together a lot. A lot of this stuff is new. There's amazingly talented people that still don't even quite know how this all works, which is kind of funny. So let that be encouraging to everybody. That this is a new field. We know that it does work, but how it works is a whole different story. So so yeah, just ask a lot of questions, stay curious, have fun, hack away.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today and putting together that awesome presentation. I'm sure it was very helpful for people, especially anyone that's interested in AI and isn't as familiar with the hardware at this point, and that wants to get to know more about GPUs and how exactly they fit into the larger puzzle of artificial intelligence in general, and how to go about researching that going forward. But again, we want to thank everyone for joining us, and we're super excited for our event tonight. It actually kicks off at 6 p.m., so that'll be at Google Launchpad in San Francisco. We have a lot of really amazing speakers coming up. You can see our agenda online, as well as a PDF of our schedule. And then our participants, we both have online and in-person participants. The on-site participants are capped at 150 attendees, and we are definitely at capacity. And then we have another like 200 that are actually going to be participating remotely as well. So this is a huge event. We're super, super excited for it. Just can't wait to put it all together. And I cannot wait to see the presentations as well when we can give away these really awesome prizes. So thanks again to NVIDIA. Thanks to you, Carlos, for putting this together. And thanks for all of our viewers for joining us today. And then we'll be going offline. And thanks again. See you next time.
See you guys.